Hey guys, I wanted to make a short video, a kind of quick update on something that I mentioned in the sermon last week. I was asked about it in the small group and we discussed it there. I was asked about it outside the small group where some people had some questions about it. So I just wanted to clarify one of the main points, or not one of the main points, but one of the points that I mentioned in last week's sermon. And that is the question, how did the older brother turn out the way he did? Why did he become so angry, so bitter, so jealous? And how could that have happened? I personally said that in the sermon that I believe that he had his own far country experience, that I believe that he did go out, he did sin, he did have the kind of life that we see in the younger brother, and then he returned, and then he didn't accept the restoration that the Father offered him. And some people ask me the question, well, where did you get this information from, and why do you believe this? First thing I want to say is clearly this is not the main point of the parable, and this is not a primary issue. So I have my opinion, but of course, if you have a different opinion, that's totally fine, and I'm not going to start an argument over it or anything. So this is just my opinion, and if you have a different one, that's totally fine. What is clear, however, is the older brother is kind of ahead of the younger brother. The older brother, obviously, we don't know how much older he is, but he has more life experience than the younger brother. And so obviously, there is a point where we can say if the younger brother, if he chooses the same path as the older brother, then he turns out the same way. And there are basically two possibilities of how the younger brother can turn out like the older brother. One would be he never leaves. He just stays at home, being dissatisfied like the younger brother, being wanting to leave, knowing that he is not happy and all these things. And he just stays nevertheless because he knows this is the right thing to do and this is what I'm supposed to do. Or the other possibility, like I mentioned, maybe he left and maybe he did return eventually. And I believe that either of those possibilities could be true. The reasons why I believe that he did have a far country experience, for one, as I mentioned in the sermon, the younger brother was willing to return as a slave, and then later on the older brother felt like a slave. So that to me is an indication that the older brother is a continuation of the story of the younger brother if he doesn't accept the restoration. Second reason is the older brother mentions that the younger brother wasted his possessions, his goods, with harlots. Now, I have a hard time to believe that the older brother even knows about harlots if he always stayed in the father's house. Obviously, there are no harlots in that house or anywhere near that household. So how did he get that information? How did he know that the younger brother might have spent his livelihood on harlots? And to me, that could be an indication that maybe that's what he did earlier. Maybe that's what he did when he went out. And now he's projecting his own experience and thinking, I was out there, I spent my livelihood with harlots, I came back. Now my younger brother did the same. And the third reason why I believe that he might have had his own far country experience is that he clearly not from the Bible, but from my own personal experience, because I went through something similar. I was the younger brother, I did a lot of weird stuff before I was a Christian, and then when I became a Christian and I realized how holy God is and what I had done, I felt so guilty. I felt so ashamed about all these things. And then I turned into the older brother. I became a worker. I felt like I had to make up. I felt like I had to do all these things now. And it wasn't until not many months, but around 2, 3, 4 months into my walk with Christ that I really experienced God's forgiveness and God's restoration. But in the meantime, between becoming a Christian and experience God's forgiveness, I really turned into the older brother, into a worker, never feeling good enough and always feeling guilty, feeling ashamed, and feeling like I have to make up and I have to work harder to be right with God. So these are some of the reasons why I personally believe that this older brother might have had his own far country experience. On the other hand, there are also reasons why we could say he probably never left the country. For example, Jesus was using the older brother as a symbol of the Pharisees. What did the Pharisees do? Well, they never really realized that they had left the Father's house. Of course, from a bigger perspective, they did. We are all sinful. But at the same time, we have to admit they felt self-righteous. They felt like, I've never slept with anyone who is not my wife. I've never done what these tax collectors do. I've never cheated anyone. I'm a good person. And so that would, on the other hand, indicate that maybe the older brother really never left the house, or he doesn't realize that he's sinful as well. So this could also be true. Jesus didn't include this detail in the story. He didn't clearly say what the older brother did and how he turned out this way. And maybe that's on purpose. Maybe Jesus did that exactly for this reason, that he said, I want you as readers, those who hear this story, including you and me, I want you to put your own life story in there. And whether you yourself felt like you had a far country experience, like my own personal story, or maybe some of us realize I'm like the older brother because I'm so self-righteous. I feel like I never left the Father's house and I worked for him. I never really did anything bad. I never really had a really sinful lifestyle, but it kind of turned into self-righteousness. And that's my life story. And that's how I can relate to this story. So maybe Jesus left it open. Maybe Jesus didn't give us these details for the very purpose to leave it open to all of us, put our own life story in there, even though it might be very, very different. So in conclusion, first of all, it's not the main point of the story. So the point is not, did the older brother go out or did he just stay home? That's not the most important aspect of this parable. The main point is, the older brother did not accept what the father offered him. The older brother was not willing or not able for whatever reason to say, I'll stop working and I'll just be in the Father's presence and I just enjoy a love relationship with my Father. That's the main point of the story. He tried to earn something that he had already received, that the Father was already offering him. But for whatever reason, he just didn't accept it. And as a result, because of that hard attitude, because of that misconception, he felt like a slave and he did not feel like a son. How he became like this? The story doesn't say that clearly, and this is why we can have different opinions on this topic. We won't make it a primary issue. I'm not dogmatic about it. I'm not saying this is the only way of interpreting this parable. You can have your own opinion. So I just want to encourage all of us, pray over it. Ask Jesus how this story applies to you. Ask Jesus about what aspect of the older brother is in your heart, what aspect of the older brother is in my heart. And then let's put our own life story in this story. Let's put our own experience in this story. And let's find where in our hearts we are like the older brother. So that's what I wanted to clarify. I hope it helps some of us. I hope it helps us have maybe some good discussions or some good time with God, wrestling over these questions with God. And I hope that we can all learn something from each other as we have these discussions and as we have these different opinions.